And it started.
Okay, good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming to the presentation today. My name is Ben Wunderly, work at the North Carolina Maritime Museum in Bogue, just over there on the front of the car. These straight shots are the bird flies. Takes me a while to get there here by vehicle. Appreciate you all coming out to Fort Macon today to attend this lecture. And I really appreciate folks at Fort Macon for letting us do our lectures.
I should make sure it's not works.
Having heard or unaware, the museum is temporarily closed for a construction project. We don't yet have an opening date. We know that it can be like this for at least.
That's 5 participants.
What we have planned is one of our Maritime Heritage Series lectures. We do these several times a month, usually on a Thursday. On a Wednesday, so maybe start the weekend early afterwards. We usually do them every Thursday. I'm here at Fort Macon State. For the upcoming months, the next one that we have scheduled before we get started on today's topic is North Carolina whales, and it'll be presented by our natural science curator of the Maritime Museum, Keith Rittmaster. That will be January 23rd at 11 o'clock. That's a Thursday, January 23rd. I've got some flyers up here. If you're interested afterwards, you can pick them up. If you need some reminders on that, but you'll see it on our social media, and it's being shared and promoted across the land that these are happening here at Fort Macon. So you've probably seen this title slide already while you've been waiting patiently. Thank you. Today's topic is U.S. Life-Saving Service Stations of Carteret County. And I'll tell you a little bit about why I decided to put this kind of presentation together. One, because we're in Carteret County. The Maritime Museum is in Carteret County. And we had several life-saving stations in Carteret County. If you don't know what the life-saving stations are, you will learn out, but basically they were the predecessor to the Coast Guard stations, which there happens to be one right next door to Fort Macon State Park, and it has the name U.S. Coast Guard Station Fort Macon. Now we're on the island of Bogue Banks, and there's actually a Coast Guard station at the other end of the island as well, Station Bogue Inlet. And I'm going to cover those in this presentation. But what I really wanted to kind of do was just highlight those stations that existed in Carteret County compared to the many other stations that we had in North Carolina and the country as well. The Life-Saving Service was the nation's response to shipwrecks along our coast. And 150, 200 years ago, even more, everything was mostly moving by water along the eastern seaboard. So when things go out on the water, sometimes they run into trouble. And if they run into trouble, those people on board need help. So the Life-Saving Service was a response to shipwrecks, and an active crew would go out and try and save those people right from the beach. These were shore-based operations. So along North Carolina's coast, they had life-saving stations dotted along the Outer Banks and then down into Carteret County. And we even had a few down around Cape Fear. But they performed a lot of rescues, a lot of lives in some very harrowing conditions. Just think about today, for example, if there were a shipwreck right off the beach and you see the wind and the waves, that's what they had to get through. And oftentimes it was in the middle of the night, in darkness, in cold weather. It may have been snowing or sleeting, raining, a hurricane. The storm surges could have been washing over the beach, and the crews from the life-saving stations still had to go out there and try and save these people. So I do highlight a few little stories about some of the rescues, at each of the stations that existed in Carteret County, but my main focus was to just highlight where the stations were and what they looked like. So I've got some maps, I've got some photographs of some of the structures, old photographs, more recent photographs, and it's kind of just like a slideshow. I will ask that, if you have any questions, maybe we can hold them to the end, but if you're worried about, not remembering your question, then just raise your hand and I'll try and get to you. I will say that right now my voice is being recorded and the slides are also being recorded, and my voice and the slides are also going live over the internet right now. Hopefully we have some people watching online. We have 5 people watching online, so hello to you. Thanks for signing up. And if you have questions from online, please type them in, and our moderator, Christine, will let me know that there's a question coming in online. So you're the moderator, right? Okay, she agrees that she is the moderator. And she's actually keeping me straight, so she's also doing that too. All right, let's move along because I don't want to keep you into the lunch hour. I didn't bring any food for any of us. U.S. Life-Saving Service Stations, Carteret County. Should be on, so I should be able to click that forward, maybe. There we go, okay. All right, we're zooming in on North Carolina. There's our coast. The ships moving up and down the seaboard, like I mentioned, they had to go around Cape Hatteras, around these shoals at Cape Lookout, around these shoals at Cape Fear, the Frying Pan Shoals. If they were headed north or south, they had to get by this stretch. So that's why the federal government said, let's put lots of life-saving stations along these outer banks. And even down here into Carteret County, and I mentioned there was a couple down here at Cape Fear area. So that was the location. But then I want to zoom in onto just Carteret County, maybe. I think my clicker's just having trouble reaching the computer. It'll get there eventually. I think there's actually probably a chair or two in the way. Let me see if I can. Okay, I think maybe that one worked. All right. All right, here's Carteret County. We know where we are, right? We're at Fort Macon State Park, right here on the end of Bogue Banks. There, I highlighted Bogue Banks. Maritime Museum's over here in Beaufort. We all know Cape Lookout, the lighthouse about right there. But our shoreline stretches from Ocracoke Inlet all the way down here to Bogue Inlet. So it's quite a bit. I don't know the exact total, but I think like maybe 80 90 miles. Yeah. So I'm going to go over where these stations were. Now this was part of a larger map, which I will say I have handouts available if you're interested. Some of them printed double-sided, some of them did not. No, none of them did. All right. Well, I have a handout with information on it, but this map was put together a while ago, and it shows locations of life-saving service stations, lighthouses, but I just wanted to highlight Carteret County. So we got, these stations were built between the years 1887 to 1905. We had Cape Lookout first, then we had Portsmouth, Station Portsmouth. We had Core Bank, which was kind of in the middle. And then we had Fort Macon, and then Station Bogue Inlet. Now down here, this little clip is from the report of the Life-Saving Service, and it just gives a more detailed, somewhat more detailed location. Station Cape Lookout was 1.5 miles south of Cape Lookout Light. Station Portsmouth, northeast end of Portsmouth Island, which some people may call North Core Banks. But a lot of people around here just call Portsmouth Island. Fort Macon, Beaufort entrance, meaning the Beaufort Inlet entrance, and 1/4 mile north of the fort. gives you a general area. Bogue Inlet, inner shore of Bogue Banks, half a mile east of Bogue Inlet. All right, we'll start with our first one here, Cape Lookout, constructed 1887 and manned the following year. This picture is the original Cape Lookout life-saving station. And a giveaway is the lighthouse way back there. So here it is at its original location, but and there's the crew. Got tired of standing up and posing for the pictures, so they decided to just sit down. Taking pictures back then was a little bit different than it is today. But I'm thinking they were posing because they had their surf boat pulled out of the shed. They had their apparatus cart with some of their equipment pulled out of the shed. You know, it's a nice sunny day. Maybe they just wanted to take the picture of everything here. So this is a good look at one of those earlier type life-saving stations that were built along the coast. It's a pretty simple structure. There's not much to it. They have a lookout tower. The downstairs was mostly for storing equipment and supplies. There was a kitchen area. You can see the chimney there. The kitchen was in the back. They had a wood stove for cooking. Their sleeping quarters were upstairs. They had a storage room upstairs. Here's where they got their water, a cistern off of the roof. And then this might have been for fuel storage, whether wood or coal, for their stove. So they had, when there was an emergency or a wreck and they needed to respond, they had to get this stuff on cart out to the beach. So they had to pull it out there. Eventually, the stations were given a horse, and they could use a horse to pull the equipment out to the beach. Now, they couldn't use a horse for patrol. They could bring it with them, but they couldn't ride on it. They had to walk. Because if they were riding the horse, they'd go too fast and they wouldn't be paying attention to the water. When they were on foot patrol looking for shipwrecks every night, they went by foot, and they had to make sure they didn't miss anything. Now, when they saw a wreck, they could jump on the horse and ride back to the station and notify the head keeper and the crew that they needed to respond to a wreck. So I'm going to zoom in. We can tell this is Cape Lookout, but I'm going to zoom in right onto it. Oh, sometimes it goes. Oh, there we go. Okay, that's a little better. Cape Lookout Point, Cape Lookout Lighthouse, Lookout Bight, Wreck Point. This would be Shackleford Banks. Now, keep in mind that this chart is from 1888, so Barden Inlet did not exist yet. There's maybe the beginning of Barden Inlet, a little baby inlet forming right there. But I wanted to show you life-saving station. That's the location of our Cape Lookout life-saving station. So not really close to the lighthouse and not close to the point, but it's actually situated so that they could get to the water to the beach side, or they could also launch back here and come around Wreck Point and make it out to the water on this side as well. So that's kind of why it was at that location. So I have various pictures of the area. Here's the Cape Lookout Lighthouse that was built in 1859. I always like these pictures show you that how different, like, you know, the topography might be some, and then especially the vegetation. I mean, look at the lack of vegetation. If you've been to the lighthouse recently, you know there are lots of shrubby myrtles and cedar trees, and then all the pine trees that were actually planted around the lighthouse at some point, I think by a Boy Scout group. All right, I came across this was a historic structure report from the Park Service, and it was really just to show you, the grounds of the Cape Lookout Life-Saving Service station. So we had the main station, B was the kitchen, C was a storage house, and then later they had stables. Remember, they had some horses later, and they had an extra boat house that came later, an inshore boat house. So that's the one that would have dumped into the hook there. And then Keeper Gaskell's private residence, circa 1892, G. So he actually didn't have to stay in the station. The head keeper at that time, Keeper Gaskell, was living in his own house right there with his family. A lot of these men were local men that worked at the station. So the folks stationed here were probably pretty fortunate that maybe they had family nearby on Harker's Island or at Diamond City on Shackleford Banks, and that so that on their day off they could go spend it with their family pretty easily. Now this is a later station that came in at Cape Lookout, and it was actually finished in 1917. So by that point, the life-saving service had already become the U.S. Coast Guard. We know that happened in 1915. So they got, at that time, they got a new, bigger station built. This is the kitchen cookhouse here. It's kept separate, but this is where the crew stayed. It still had a lookout tower, so it looks a little bit different than that original building. They kept the original building, and I think they still used it for storage probably. Come on, there we go. And here they are together. There's the 1917 structure and the 1887 structure, and then some of those outbuildings. And they both still stand today, except this one was decommissioned as surplus and purchased privately, moved at least 1,000 yards away. I don't know, maybe less, maybe more. Moved farther away and used as a fishing camp or cabin, if you will, but has since reverted to National Park Service property, and now they manage it, and they're in the process of fixing it up as a historic structure. The guy just was putting the dates up there. Here it is at the location after it was moved. It looks a little bit different. They added on to it a little bit. So it was bought by a local resident. The structure was moved using a mule and capstan to kind of pull it along. It took about a week, but now it was used, as I mentioned, as like a seasonal cabin, and now it's owned by the Park Service. Okay, if you want the exact location, here's a satellite image. There's the original location, and that's where the 1917 building still is. There's where the 1887 life-saving station ended up. An interesting note, if you walk further down this little trail and you come out to the water, you'll see one of the original keeper's quarters from the lighthouse that was also decommissioned as surplus at some point, purchased and floated further down the shore and plopped on the land right there. But that's now owned by the Park Service too. So that's the East Beach. There's the Southwest or the West Beach. And then there's Lookout Bight there. And the point would be down here. Okay. This was the first, some people say this was the first major shore-based rescue that was performed by the Coast Guard when it was formed in 1915. So under the name of the Coast Guard, the crew from Cape Lookout Station responded to the wreck of the Sylvia C. Hall out on Cape Lookout Shoals. This is from the Lifesavers annual report. The Sylvia Hall was a schooner, was hauling lumber. I don't remember where it was headed to, but they rescued all six or five. They all rescued all 6 crew members and the captain from the shipwreck. Now, this is just a nondescript shipwreck. This is not the Sylvia Hall. I just wanted to paint the picture here. There's a wrecked sailing vessel in the waves being torn apart, and that's the type of situation that the lifesavers were responding to. So that was March 18th, 1915, less than a few months after the life-saving service became the U.S. Coast Guard. So this was a little bit about the wreck. The winds were blowing southeast at the time. Yeah, they are right, exactly. I had some more details on it, but I don't know if we need to read all this in the name of time. The Sylvia Hall was from Connecticut. There we go. It was headed to Jackson. It was carrying a load of cypress lumber from Jacksonville, Florida to New York. It was a New Haven, Connecticut schooner. During a southeast gale, the winds gusting over 40, the captain and 5 crew tried to steer to the protected waters inside of Cape Lookout Bight, and the ship struck on the shoals about 7.5 miles from the station. The morning watch at Station Cape Lookout reported to the keeper Gillikin that a ship was stranded. The crew responded in the motor lifeboat. So at this point, they not only had a surf boat that they could row, they also had a motor lifeboat that they could launch into the protected waters and come out the inlet and respond. So they get the motor lifeboat and they head out there. 2 huge waves break over the boat. 2 guardsmen are almost swept into the sea. Another one was badly injured. The engine was swamped and stalled out. They finally got it restarted, but they had to kind of take care of themselves. They pulled away to a safer distance. So they were trying to get into the wreck. They pulled away. They're assessing the situation. The head keeper, I think he with no change in the conditions, Gillikin kind of finally says, well, we got to go back. We can't do it today. We can't get this big clunky motor powered lifeboat into the wreck. There's waves breaking all around. There's waves breaking over the deck of the schooner. So they head back. It's late at night. They get a little bit of rest, but probably what they're really doing is getting everything ready for their next attempt before sunrise. This time they take the motor lifeboat, they tow the rowing surf boat, the much lighter wooden surf boat, out behind it, and then they get close to the wreck. They get into the surf boat and they kind of dance on the waves on it, and they maneuver real easy through the breakers and the surf, and they take several trips to pull everyone off of the wreck. So it's not that it was just one of the first rescues of the newly formed Coast Guard. It was it was one of those harrowing events. It was one of those difficult situations, but they pulled everyone off. This was some news articles and the thank you letter from the captain of the schooner, Sylvia C. Hall. Dear sir, I wish to sincerely thank you and your sturdy crew for the valuable services which you rendered me and my crew of the schooner Sylvia C. Hall, which stranded on the shoals March 17, 1915. Also for the treatment shown me while at your station. You deserve great praise, and I shall not fail to do my part making it known. Yours very truly, C.W. Sprague, Master. And this was a news article about the incident as well. All right, next station, moving along, we go up to Portsmouth, this time constructed in 1894 and manned in 1895. The photographer was able to get a picture before they all got tired and walked away. There it is, the crew and keeper. Now this station is right on the water, but in the protected water inside of Ocracoke Inlet. You see their rowing surf boat can be kept in the structure and come right down this ramp into the water. This looks like maybe it's low tide right now. And then this was just a little poling skiff that they probably used to get around the village of Portsmouth. If you've ever been to Portsmouth, there's little creeks and marsh creeks that connect out to the inlet that you can kind of get your way around if you wanted to. The station was by the village, but it wasn't in the village. It was pretty close though. Come on, clicker, clicker. Oh wait, I did it. And I zoomed in. There we go. Okay, Ocracoke Inlet. So Ocracoke Island is right over here. Portsmouth Island here, and life saving station. I can't remember the date on this chart, but it's a late 1800s. You can see some of the other little islands out. Beacon Island. I think there was the first lighthouse ever in North Carolina was in this inlet. The Shell Castle Light. So, okay, so the village itself, you can see some of the structures, these little black dots, those are houses and buildings in Portsmouth Village, but the station was over here on this creek. So they could launch here and make their way out Ocracoke Inlet to respond to a wreck. If they wanted to, they could also haul their surf boat out this way to the beach and launch from here. Probably depended on the situations, the conditions. Maybe it's my finger. There we go. I had to switch fingers. Maybe that's what it was. I don't know. Just, okay, don't mind me. All right. So that inlet was actually one of the most used inlets early on before we even became a country. Ocracoke Inlet. So here's a 1750s chart showing Portsmouth and Ocracoke Inlet, Pamlico Sound. They spelled it a little different back then, didn't they? Anyway, so here's Portsmouth Village showing up on this 1753 map. So it's also one of the oldest communities that existed in North Carolina, Portsmouth Village. We know no one lives there anymore today, but it's managed by the Park Service as part of Cape Lookout National Seashore. So I think I had some pictures of the village because I really like it. I've been out there a handful of times in the cold and wind and in the heat and bugs, which the bugs are almost year round. But if you go on a high wind day, it helps, and in the wintertime. So there's the village. So the station was off this picture here. But you could see, this is not all of the village, this is just some of it. But it is pretty low lying, it's pretty marshy. It wasn't as vegetated probably early on and when people were living there because they realized that with the wind it would help keep the bugs down. But so at some point, as folks moved away from the island, the vegetation kind of took over, but then the Park Service came in later in the 60s and 70s and kind of cleared out that vegetation. So these pictures that I got from archives actually show when people were still living in the village. And I don't know if this was the 40s and 50s, but that's, I believe, the post office. And there's someone's residence in the background. You could see some of the village members there. Here's a woman hanging out laundry to dry. This is the church. There were several churches at Portsmouth over the years, but this is the one that still stands. But I love these pictures. I mean, life on Portsmouth. You don't get to see pictures of it too often. Another aerial shot, but now we see the station, and then there's the village in the background here. At some point, they cleared a little landing area for small airplanes, and that was 1950s. Thank you. So here's the creek that they could launch in and get out to Ocracoke Inlet. There they are. They're obviously posing for a picture here. And they look pretty proud. I would be as well, to be in the crew and be in their surf boat where they go save people. I just did a satellite image. Again, village, station, inlet, and you can see the breakers out here towards the beach side. So there is a path or road that did connect to the beach, but there are many times where this little island was actually separated from core banks because of high water. So, I mean, and I think maybe that's why it's called Portsmouth Island and not really the whole banks, but Portsmouth Island. Because with the right wind and tide and storm, this area gets covered in water and kind of separates it. So this was this particular wreck that I highlight from Cape Lookout Portsmouth was supposedly the largest number of people rescued from a shipwreck in the life-saving services history. And I don't know if I had the total up there or not. Well, that's just 36 from the initial round. 380 passengers from the ship, May 9th. So on the 8th, the Portuguese brig Veracruz II was headed to New Bedford, Massachusetts, with passengers and whale oil from a sperm whale. And they were probably, the whale oil was probably harvested in the Caribbean, maybe. Cape Verde Islands. Anyway, they run aground at Ocracoke Inlet. Surfmen at Portsmouth take 36 passengers, but they're like, what are we going to do with all these people? There was over 400 people on that boat. The weather deteriorates, and the surfmen begin transferring the remaining passengers. But due to the number of rescued, the lifesavers carry them to a nearby island so that volunteers, Good Samaritans from Portsmouth Village, can go and pick them up and ferry them to the village. So the lifesavers are going to the wreck. The waves are getting bad. They're plucking them off, putting them on this island. The villagers from Portsmouth are coming and helping take them off that island and get them to Portsmouth. So May 11th, by that point, everyone gets to the village. The 11th, the rescued passengers are carried to the U.S. Revenue steam vessel Boatwell, then transported to Newbern. Like 400 people on this ship. Yeah, and some of the interesting things was that the captain comes ashore at Portsmouth. He doesn't make it to Newbern. He finds some other way to get off the island, because they think what he was doing was bringing a bunch of people into the country illegally, because nobody had passports. The captain didn't have any, he didn't even want to be caught or seen, supposedly. Now this part might be a story, but I don't know. This is what I've read about it. But all these people, they had to find something to do with them. By the time here they are, actually unloading at Newbern. So I thought that was pretty largest rescue, but with some clouded mystery there as to what was really going on. Some other Portsmouth images. Portsmouth Station was decommissioned in 1937 temporarily, but was utilized during World War II. And here's a Coast Guard mounted beach patrol. They definitely had some horses there. There's the station. There's the kitchen house. Both structures still stand. 1946, the station's turned over to the War Assets Administration for surplus, and it was used as a hunting lodge, and the porch was screened in. I bet they were glad about that. And then now it's included in the historic Portsmouth Village, part of Cape Lookout Seashore. Station Core Bank looks a lot like the station at Portsmouth, doesn't it? Built around the same time period, constructed 1896. This building no longer stands. Unfortunately, it was lost in a fire. It had already been decommissioned by that point and might have already been on Park Service property. But you can see similar structure, tower, somewhere to bring the boat in and out of, the porch, the kind of wraparound porch, and this is probably the kitchen building. Let me show you where it was. There's Core Banks. There's the village of Atlantic. And here is Station Core Bank. It would actually later be renamed Station Atlantic for the nearby village on the mainland. Here's a aerial photograph. They later had a dock that went out to the sound. A few other outbuildings here, but you can see. Yeah, I think it was pretty close. One of the versions of Drum Inlet, right? Drum Inlet comes and goes. And sometimes there's two drum inlets at one time, maybe. I don't know. I can't keep up with Drum Inlet. But yeah, close, and maybe that's why they put it there at that location, being in close proximity to an inlet where people were likely to run aground or come into trouble. Now, this is a 1950 image of Atlantic, the waterfront at Atlantic, the harbor. And I included that there because, as I mentioned, the station's renamed Station Atlantic after this village. And look at these, yeah, these boats in here, fishing vessel. And I think that is the mail boat Alita. So that boat would carry mail and passengers from Atlantic to Ocracoke and back. And they had regular runs. But isn't that great? Look at these old cars back here, the automobiles in the back, you know, all the gear and stuff on. There's another fishing boat. And the fish house is there. So here is a, after decommission, boarded up, kind of a sad picture. 1965, it was closed. In 1966, we know that the property was, you know, Park Service property at that point. And as I mentioned, it was burned down, unfortunately. But here was the general location that I think I found on this satellite image. This says Drum Inlet Crab Spawning Sanctuary, Cross Shoal Channel. I can't read that one, but I think, yeah, I think Drum Inlet was probably this way, maybe to the north of it. Yeah, the fire destroyed in 1968. Okay, we're moving right here to Fort Macon, right where we are. Here's an old postcard image of Station Fort Macon for some type of event that they were celebrating something, that they put all their signal flags out. You know, signal flags and signal devices was necessary for the crew to use so they could communicate with ships going by. If they needed to warn them, they had signal flares. They also had a bugle. They could say, hey, you know, just making some noise because you guys are getting too close to the beach. Maybe it was foggy. Maybe, you know, maybe it was tough conditions. But I think, and they also had flags that they could display. Now, I was talking with a park ranger, Ben Fleming, here, and he said he was looking into what each one of those signal flags was. He said it looked like maybe it was the alphabet. And so why would they put the alphabet out there all at one time? And I was thinking that maybe it was like a celebratory occasion, or maybe they were just for this picture, for this postcard. That, you know, it'd look cool if we put all the flags out and they're flying out there and they're colorful, or, well, obviously you don't see color in a black and white, but they got these shapes and designs on them. But maybe also there was some type of commemoration or event happening that day at the station there, and they wanted it to look special. Either way, there's our station, constructed in 1904. I think we'll zoom in on it. Okay, Fort Macon. And there's the fort structure on this early 1900s chart. And there's Fort Macon LSS, Life Saving Station. They had this long, I don't know if it was a dock or a canal that made it out to the water out here for their rescue boats. And they had a good visual of, you know, Morehead City all the way around to Shackelford and down the beach. So they could see a pretty good 360-degree view. All right, and I threw this 1733 map up here just to show you, like Ocracoke Inlet, Beaufort Inlet has been heavily utilized for some time now, at least since the 1730s. I mean, and even earlier. We know of stories of shipwrecks happening out here prior to the 1730s. Okay, there's Bogue Banks. So we're right about here. There's Cape Lookout. And in this time period, they referred to Beaufort Inlet. It says Port Beaufort or Topsail Inlet. So they actually called it Topsail Inlet. But we know Topsail Inlet today is down the beach, down the shore some. There's Bogue Inlet there. So Beaufort was right in here. And I believe that would have been Harker's Island. Drum Inlet shows up on this map. And then Hunting Quarters Inlet. Hunting Quarters, I think, is what they used to refer to Atlantic as, if I'm not mistaken. They just refer to the community or the area as Hunting Quarters. And there's Cedar Island. Okay, I think I know I think I know where I am now. All right. So I put this slide up here because out of a lot of those life-saving stations that were kind of remote, especially on the Outer Banks, you had this one station here at Fort Macon that had already, before there was a life-saving service station, was becoming a popular tourist destination. And that's why I put this picture up here. Now, I believe this picture is actually probably taken out at Bird Shoals off of Beaufort. And I want to say 1903, but I can't read my little number down there. But it shows a bunch of children and women dressed up in their bathing suits, and they're out splashing and having a good time. And this little newspaper article I had talks about how at Atlantic Beach, there's a pavilion 70 by 40 feet, which the visitors sit to watch the waves as they chase each other up and down the sanded slopes of the beach. A break over to merry surf bathers. A row of dressing houses stretches along the shore for 200 yards, furnishing accommodations for surf bathing as to make that one of the chief attractions. So the article was referring to the Atlantic Beach area. So I thought, here, those remote stations, lifesavers were out there kind of on their own, desolate places. And then the crew at Fort Macon is right by this little tourist area. I imagine that they enjoyed seeing beach visitors and stuff from time to time. Here's a image of the Fort Macon station crew out for a row. They had weekly drills with all their operations. And one of the weekly drills was get out and row the boat, because you better be in shape when the time comes. When it really counts, you need to save some people. You better be able to row that surf boat out through the breakers. So they were constantly rowing. They were practicing with their life-saving gear. They were practicing with their signal devices. They were doing that constantly. Here is a later image. I think the date was 1935. At that point, Fort Macon State Park existed, I believe. But so you had some in-holdings here for the Coast Guard station. There's that original building. And here's a picture just to kind of compare. Here's the Atlantic Beach Hotel, and opened that in 1935, the year that other picture was taken. But there were several hotels and buildings and stuff like this right there in Atlantic Beach. Let me go back onto this newspaper article I found about the new superstation that came into Coast Guard Station Fort Macon in 1939. The superstation. This is the first picture to be published of any of the new super Coast Guard stations which are being built along North Carolina coast. It's located at Fort Macon at Bogue Inlet. It will be the first in a series of new station buildings to be completed in the Coast Guard expansion program. In the foreground, a member of the crew of Fort Macon is shown with 2 summer visitors on the coast, and it is 2 young women in bikinis that have walked up from Atlantic Beach, and he's going to show them the superstation. Is shown with 2 summer visitors on the coast who are interested in this particular point on the Carteret coast. Beaufort News photograph, Acock Brown. But that building doesn't exist anymore, and neither does the original station Fort Macon, obviously. I think I have a picture here. Here's the fort, obviously. Here's the old parking lot. The visitor center is not on there. Look at all the jetty structures out here. I imagine that there's been some sand or something happening here. I don't know. Ben, what do you think? Yeah. That's all underground, right? Yeah. I put some dates on here because you got to look off to the side. There's the 1904 Coast Guard Life-Saving Service Station, and then the 1939 superstation that came in. So that's how close they were to the fort. And we know, and that's probably a park building. The office and stuff was there. Oh, and I threw in some old pictures of Fort Macon State Park at the beach. The original structures out there, picnic area. Looks like it was just a dirt parking lot. Okay, and I had to do your satellite photo just to show as well. But I think we're pretty familiar with everything that's around us. Okay, here's a modern photograph of the park, the visitor center, and then that's all Coast Guard Station there. We move down the beach, we look at the Bogue Inlet Station, constructed in 1905, so the fourth and final station for Carteret County. And again, some folks posing out there on the porch for this picture. We can see Bogue Inlet. This map from 1917, it says CG. And the little symbol is actually like a lifeboat with oars sticking out from the side. CG, Coast Guard. Bogue Banks, Bear Island, Bogue Inlet, and the little town of Swansboro right there. So at the time that this station came in, they were in a pretty remote spot. 1904, on the western end of Bogue Banks, I don't think there was much going on. Now the community of Swansboro existed, but you had to get there by boat. In 1941, a new station is completed at Bogue Inlet. I don't think it was, I don't know if it was considered a super station or not. What happened to that original building? The 1905 structure was eventually decommissioned, and in 1950, it was taken from Bogue Banks all the way over to Cedar Point by barge, and it was used as a boarding house. So you could rent rooms and stay there, but today it's just a private residence, but I think it's really a base for some commercial fishing operations. You can kind of see it. This is a Google Street Map image, obviously, but you can drive by. Traffic's usually moving pretty quick through there. So if you're driving, keep your eye on the road. If you're a passenger, you can look for it, okay? But you can still see it. It's still there. I always felt like this would be a great candidate for getting fixed up and making into some type of, museum of some sort on that end of the county, whether for the life-saving service and Coast Guard, or for just the local history of Cedar Point and Swansboro. But they have the Swansboro Historical Group that is working on a museum in city limits. Yeah, city limits in Swansboro now. So unfortunately, this original station building needs a little bit of TLC, and it's kind of sad to see that it in that condition. But just to show you the distance there, so that's the location where it was, and they moved it all the way back here. Here's the Intercoastal Waterway. There's Huggins Island, part of Hammocks Beach State Park, and then there's Bear Island, which is the main component of Hammocks Beach. The end. So, like I said, I just tried to get some recognition for those sites that were just in Carteret County, and tell a little bit of interesting facts and stories about them. Thank you for coming out. I'll have some time here at the end for some questions. Christine's checking to see if we had any questions online. Otherwise, I really hope you enjoyed the presentation. Thanks for coming out on a rainy, windy day like this. And thanks again to the crew at Fort Macon State Park for hosting us for our lecture series. Yes. Did anybody have any questions? Yes. Good question. So for those watching online, we had a question: how many crew members were at each station? So early on in the 1870s, 80s, 90s, each station had 6 crew members and a head keeper. Now, in times of rough situations or in the wintertime especially, they may have added an extra crew member. Now on the islands of Hatteras Island, on up into Currituck County, from Dare to Currituck County in North Carolina, there was a life-saving station about every 10 miles or so, 7 to 10 miles. So that meant that 7 miles away, you had 7 more men, because there were wrecks that might have happened in between each station, and they could call on each other. You know, the crew at Little Kennekeet could call the crew at Big Kennekeet, say, hey, we need some help. Or the guys at Hatteras could call the folks at Durant and say, hey, come down, we need some help. And they actually had wireless, they had telegraph connections eventually that they could do that and, you know, send messages back and forth pretty quick. So, and early on, they weren't stationed there year round. So those buildings sat empty. The head keeper was kept on just to make sure that, you know, nothing happened to the building. But the season really started in fall and ran through the spring. But eventually they were brought on year round. You know, obviously hurricanes can happen in June, July, and August, and you might have a shipwreck during a hurricane. So that was a good question. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
So the last, I know like Fort Macon, life-saving station
In Carteret County? Yeah. So Fort Macon, yeah, the question was, what was the last station to close in Carteret County? The 2 still existing, as you mentioned, Fort Macon, and then Station Emerald Isle or Station Bogue Inlet still exist as a functioning Coast Guard station. So that only leaves the 3 that the sites are now within Cape Lookout National Seashore. So we know that the Core Bank Station or Portsmouth Station, for example, was decommissioned, and probably Core Bank 2 until World War II, and then it was used again and then decommissioned. And probably it was the case, I think, at Cape Lookout as well, in the 70s.
The 80s, when the station closed, but they kept it
Yeah.
there. Yeah, Cape Lookout.
Yeah, that was the.
It turned to a light station.
Right.
To run the generators to power Cape Lookout.
Okay. Yeah, so Cape Lookout would have been the last one that was part of Station Cape Lookout, the U.S. Coast Guard. Station Portsmouth and Station Core Bank had already been turned over to the Park Service, decommissioned, and became, you know, now historic structures. And now the one at Cape Lookout near the point is now Park Service property as well, I think. Yes, sir.
Yeah. How's the efforts coming for the original Cape Lookout station restoration?
Yeah, the 1887 structure that, yeah. I have not been out there in a while, so the question was about the restoration efforts for that original Cape Lookout Station building. I've not been out there in several years, but I have contacts and I know people that work at Cape Lookout, and I think that they have started to work on it and it's ongoing. Yeah, I know they have maintenance crews and carpenters and stuff that are at the same time taking care of structures at Portsmouth Village.
So it's being preserved.
Yes. Yeah, that's the plan, to get it completely stabilized, so that it, you know, it can, you know, because it too fell into kind of some disrepair, and it sat there. You know, the Park Service doesn't get a lot of money, you know, as far as federal funding goes, so they kind of have to rely on what they get in their budgets to do any extra projects like that. Now I know, like, you know, to me and especially people in the county, buildings mean a lot, and to see them in disrepair, you know, it's frustrating. And
in a historical building, we probably have like 2x4
yeah, they can't just, right, when they rebuild it and make it nice, they can't just go to Lowe's Hardware and get stuff's got to be done with historical accuracy so that it can continue to be a historical structure, and be protected. So these are great questions. So
I read an article
yeah.
a few years ago. The MLI, the old MLI Coast Guard station, that was purchased on a sealed bid.
Wow. So we had to,
$25.
yeah. Wow. I don't know, for the folks listening online, we had someone that shared the structure at Bogue Inlet, that original structure sold $25. Yeah. Now I do a presentation on these screw pile lighthouses as well. I don't know if you know about those, but they were actually lighthouses. They were actually houses on stilts in the sound that had a light in the top. And a lot of those were decommissioned in the 40s and 50s. And they were selling them for like $50. But the thing was you had to go get it and move it. So just like that station at Bogue Inlet, that $25, but then he had to move it, right? We had another question in the back here.
So, if you look at the illustrations of the lookout at the light station, it's obviously pretty desolate, but now it's pretty important.
Yeah.
That took place.
Yeah, a good question. And I touched on it briefly in a little bit earlier, but for those that are listening online, you had a question about the grounds and area around Cape Lookout life-saving station, and even the lighthouse itself in general, how, 70, 60, 100 years ago, it looked pretty desolate. There wasn't a lot of vegetation. And nowadays it's a lot different. So things to consider are storm activity. We know that in the late 1800s, there was a series of devastating hurricanes. The hurricane in 1933 opened Bogue Inlet. So that time period, you had a lot of storm surge and overwash. There was an 1879 hurricane. They call it the Great Beaufort Hurricane. It flooded the whole first floor of the keeper's quarters at the lighthouse. And the lighthouse had water in it too. So that means those storm waves were just ravaging the beach and the island and taking everything with it. Vegetation, fence posts, buildings, animals. The station mule at Cape Lookout Light Station was found miles away on an island the following day. He was still alive. He actually came up onto the porch, was like, let me in. And the keepers did not oblige. They probably didn't hear the mule on the porch during a full Category 4 hurricane. But anyway, my point was that vegetation would be swept clean. And then over time, it can grow back. It can come back. So you get the wax myrtles, you get the cedar trees, you get the yaupons growing behind any little sand dune that forms. All you need is a little bit of beach grass and sea oats, starts collecting sand, starts building a dune, and then the vegetation can come in behind that dune on the leeward side, away from the beach, where it's a little more protected. As well, I mentioned that pine trees were actually planted, I think, by a Boy Scout group at some point as a way to kind of protect in that lighthouse area in the keeper's quarters. So that's why you see so many of those, I think they're loblolly pines probably, that were just put down there. And yes, Ben.
Well, maybe it was the same thing, but it was purposely cleared for a lot of sites for the cannon fire.
For the fort.
Every
Yeah.
everything you see there out there now coming in, that's all plants. That's our pictures from the 30s and 40s don't show them.
Yeah.
How they make the videos.
Yes, that's pretty impressive to see that, given a chance, it'll come back. And you guys have a beautiful nature trail to take you through some of that vegetation. There's nice live oak trees that have come in. So yeah, things change. We're so used to just seeing every day how it is right now, but events can happen, and time itself can happen, and things not only look different, they were shaped different too. The islands themselves that these structures exist on are shaped different. Or we saw the jetties in the aerial photograph at Fort Macon. Humans have a hand in shaping what it looks like as well. Pumping sand on a beach, putting rocks out there, trying to build sand dunes. So that's, and I love getting those kind of questions, and I love talking about that, because we here on the coast are in an ever-changing, very dynamic environment, whether we like it or not. Most of the time it seems pretty fine, but sometimes you just get one big event and things are all messed up. Keeps it exciting, right? Depends on how you look at it. Yes.
There's a website you can go to that will show you the timeline
Oh, wow. Yeah. Yeah. I bet that's pretty wild. And someone, I don't know if anyone's watching online anymore or not, but oh, wow. Oh, great. Thanks for sticking in there and putting up with me. Read someone share that there's a website online where you can show the aerial photographs of Cape Lookout and see those changes in time of the sand and the dunes and the vegetation and the shape of the island. I mean, that Cape Lookout Point itself is probably one of the most dynamic areas in the county, where that point grows and gets chopped off by a storm and then grows again and gets separated and you get a little island out there. Yeah, we had our own island too, well before Cape Hatteras had what were they calling it? Shelley Island or something? Or we had our own little island for years here off of Cape Lookout Point. we were just not as big time as Hatteras, I guess.
You mentioned fire at one station, the last Coast Guard station is burning. That's in the last.
Wow.
So what happens, they're getting that, they build them out of wood, cedar shakes.
Yeah.
Cedar shakes,
Yeah.
when you take a look out, turning on wings, you catch it on butter.
It goes up quick. Yeah. Yeah.
So those got on this station, burning it back.
Now, did they have an original? I think they might have had an original structure and a second one. Yeah.
It was a fairly new station.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
But it was built to look like an old.
Yeah.
Shapes on it.
Yeah. Yeah. We had, for those online, we had someone share that station at Oak Island, that the second station, I believe, was built, that was burnt as well. And he just made the point that, you know, it's just all wood, cedar shakes, wood framing, wood joists and timbers, and doesn't take much. And I don't think they had a sprinkler system, is my guess. Yeah. So yeah, a lot of these life-saving stations that were decommissioned. You could buy them. Maybe it was $25, but even there's some that on the Outer Banks that still exist, that were bought and turned into offices for beach cottage rental companies. There's the Black Pelican restaurant in Kitty Hawk that is an original life-saving service station, but they added on to it, so it's hard to tell. So they, if you look in the right places, you'll see some of those old buildings. And the Park Service is also fixing up these buildings as well. There's a nonprofit group at Chickamaucomico where they fixed up the life-saving station there. It's a little museum. I highly recommend a visit. The Cape Hatteras Seashore is fixing up the Kinnikee life-saving station. So there's still some of the original buildings around, and people are taking the time and energy and investing the money to fix them up. So, well, I got 12 o'clock. I'll be glad to take any questions. Otherwise, thanks for coming. If you want to stick around and talk, we can do that too. But I appreciate y'all, and maybe we'll see you at our next lecture in January the 23rd. Yeah, thanks for coming. Thank you. Good. Thanks for coming. We're hoping at least by the end of the summer.